Hi, I'm Thorkil Sohn from Denmark, and my contact information can be read in the description to this video. And I'll talk about free trade or tariffs or protection. I think most people immediately know what the main meaning of the two terms free trade or tariffs, what the meaning of the two terms is, so I'll allow myself to assume that what is best, not at least for working people. The question has divided the waters for time immemorial and is now highly topical again with Trump's attempt to make America great again by protecting the country from what he considers unfair trade and competition from other countries. Throughout history, these who tend towards socialist views have often been skeptical of free trade, which they consider a kind of social dumping that destroys our jobs because countries with lower wages will take them over and thereby press the wages and working conditions that the trade unions has achieved over decades by hard struggle. Many on the left also largely view free trade as a liberal or capitalist arrangement that only benefits capital, the evil capital. This point of view has some experience with it. Take for example today's globalization, which has a lot in common with free trade. It has not benefited the ordinary wage earner in particular, but has mostly benefited billionaires and mega corporations that operate across national borders and often have a larger turnover than many smaller nations. We are therefore faced with a paradox, for it is obvious that free trade increases the world's overall prosperity by ensuring that production takes place where it has the best conditions and can be carried out most advantageously. This makes the best possible use of natural and human resources and increases the total amount of real wealth. Just as free competition promotes innovation and inventions that can support productions. Not only the production of things such as food, houses, cars, energy, books, and so on, but also to a large extent the production of non-material things such as invention, improved medical science, and so on, provided that the concept of free trade also includes these things so they are not prevented from being used freely and are not protected by, for example, unreasonable exclusive rights, patents, etc. Finally, free trade is peacemaking. You do not fight with your customers, whereas tariffs are a kind of war. And now I'll take a critical look at tariffs and similar protective measures. The idea of protection has its origins in a natural human impulse, namely that you care about yourself, your loved one, and your country, fellow countrymen. In itself an appealing idea which is necessary for us to maintain our existence. The idea is also the background for our desire for a police force and an authority that will protect us from evil forces. But that is precisely why not all protection is beneficial. Only protection against evil is beneficial. If protection hinders good, it is harmful. This is why we generally agree that we must prevent violence that would force us to do what we do not want to do. But we must not prevent free speech, for instance, even if it might convince us to voluntarily do what we previously thought was crazy. Trade and the exchange of ideas are similar good things that occurs voluntarily and is beneficial. Attempts to protect against free trade are usually driven by ignorance or selfishness, but can also be fueled by seemingly legitimate self-interest. Take, for example, the so-called machine stormers. those who, often rightly, fear that progress will destroy their current jobs. This is why weavers and spinners smashed the first automatic looms and spinning machines. Similar situations can easily arise when, for example, drivers, office workers, and many others see their jobs disappear due to artificial intelligence. But I still think everyone can see that if this line of thinking had prevailed, we would still be going around reaping with a sickle. It would certainly have secured thousands of jobs, but it would also have created a society that remains in a poor state. Or we can look at an example of what would happen if we unconditionally applied the line of thinking of including tariffs on everything that could harm our jobs. If, for example, a pill was invented abroad that could cure cancer, the argument would lead us to having to impose a huge tariff on this pill, as it would otherwise destroy a lot of jobs for doctors, nurses, and so on in the hospital industry. In reality, it is foolish to legislate against something that is a natural thing for all people, and it is a natural thing to try to buy and sell, and that is why people do not see it as a crime to smuggle some goods subject to tariffs through border control, even those who are supporters of protection. That is because something natural has been turned into an artificial crime. Okay, let us look at a few more examples that are often put forward in support of tariffs. The best argument for tariffs is to protect domestic production and jobs. That is, for example, the rationale for Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminium and automobiles. It is not only to protect the US own production but by preventing imports, but actually increasing it so that thousands of new jobs are created. However, this raises several questions. For instance, why exactly should this protection be put up as customs walls around the USA? Couldn't the state of New York, with the same arguments, not demand that their printers should be protected against the import of printed matters from other US states so that these jobs in New York do not disappear? And notice that tariffs are always demanded on imports, almost never on export, only in emergency situations where there is a threat of, for instance, famine. We will now take the last example from New York and transfer it to a single example to get a truly universal understanding of how protection works. The merchants in Iceland want protection against the residents buying grocery goods outside the island and convince the inhabitants that it is necessary to protect jobs in the Iceland. Therefore, checkpoints are set up at all ferries and bridges to collect a duty of, for instance, 50% of all shopping bags from outside that are brought to our Iceland. What will be the result? The merchant in this island will raise prices by approximately 40%, so there is still a little advantage to shop locally. All unnecessary visits from outside, tourism, etc. will plummet. There will hardly be any new jobs, and everyone in the Iceland will have their grocery budget increased. Who will benefit? Yes, it is not difficult to guess: the merchant, and they will even soon become lazy and limit the range of goods and service because there is no great competition from outside. And guess at the end who will fight with tooth and nail for protection to be maintained forever. and of course claim in strong terms that the abolition of the tariff will destroy hundreds of jobs in the Iceland. And believe me, those who are unable to think independently will fear that the merchants are right and will fight fiercely to ensure that their protection is not taken away from them. They have acquired the nature of a chain dog. It is important to understand that this is how all tariff protections affect the population and mindsets everywhere, in Denmark, in the EU, in the USA, in Canada, in Mexico, and so on. To conclude this section, I will put forward a few simple examples of how free trade, despite all objection, is useful and beneficial. We should remember that what applies in such simple cases also applies in reality in general. If Robinson Crusoe and Friday, I hope you know who they are, have been discovered on their desert island by a ship from the outside world, they would be happy, not because they necessarily wanted to leave the island. Let's think that they have become happy about their home, but because they could now freely buy the things they needed with the goods they had, for example, coconuts and fresh water, which the ship lacked. Imagine if one of the sailors was a supporter of tariffs and protection, and he told them, "Be careful if you trade, because you risk losing your jobs. You could, for example, risk buying a fine boat and thereby losing all the thousands of hours of work that go into hollowing out a log for a canoe." And if an Indian tribe that only knew how to use bow and arrow met an outsider who wanted to sell them guns, wouldn't they be happy to give lots of expensive skins for each gun on the spot and be satisfied with a good deal, even though the skins might be worth more in the trader's country than 50 guns? So he would be satisfied too. Would the Indians have been cheated? No, not if there was no coercion or cunning involved. And soon the rumor of the good price would bring new traders to the trades with lots of guns, and the price would quickly adjust to a reasonable level, partly because the supply of guns increased, but also because the Indians could now, with the new weapon, obtain many more skins with considerably less effort. Everyone would benefit from the trade, and the world's total wealth in the form of skins would have been increased. I'll have to say we are ignoring the consequences for the environment here. That is an other matter that must be dealt with other legislation. It is not an argument against free trade. It is simply contrary to human nature to prevent free people from trading and exchanging ideas with each other, and it is fundamentally absurd to think that it takes the work away from us. In this connection, it is worth mentioning that the so-called developing countries increasingly want free trade instead of aid to develop their countries, simply because rich countries, through custom tariffs and the exploitation of the poverty in the developing countries, get their hands on precious raw materials at a substandard price and usually steal much more than they give. And now I'll talk about why is free trade the right thing when it is not working. Free trade has proven to have the great weakness that it does not significantly raise wages for work, but benefits the already rich. And that is the paradox that we should seek a solution to. Also because we have seen that protection, which socialists tend to favor for the above reason, does not work either. On the contrary, socialists feel that free trade, for example for Denmark, will steal especially low-wage jobs from us by moving work to countries where the hourly wage is just a few kroner an hour, and at the same time they can proprietarily distance themselves from such exploitation without mentioning that even a low wage in a poor country is better than no wage at all. When Trump agrees with the socialist, it may be, if I play the devil's advocate, because he has realized that it works according to his wishes, namely that it is the rich who score a profit. Or, of course, maybe because he really wants to help the working people, but just don't understand economics. First, we must come to terms with an idea that we immediately find desirable, even necessary, namely the idea that we consider work to be essential and that all kinds of work are therefore good. This naturally arises from the fact that it is the only possibility for the vast majority of people to make ends meet to survive. Certainly, technical development has increased production, so many of the goods that today's wage earners can acquire would have been non-existent for our grandparents, and in a few countries joint agreements between unions and employers, together with politically determined transfers of wealth through taxes, have raised living conditions above this substantial minimum. But still, free trade has not helped significantly. The idea that work is essential to life therefore persists. Work is not free. It is a matter of grace. It is embedded in our very language, employer. Many people believe that it is capital that is the opponent of work, even through the means of productions, for instance a sawmill or a machine factory, in reality only are stored work, as if the employer was not just as dependent on the workers as the other way around. The work beggar mentality is so widespread that we consider all kinds of works for good, whether it is the extra work you get in a hotel kitchen because you have to clean up after 1,000 plates have been destroyed after falling to the floor, or the jobs that are created when a hurricane has destroyed half a city, or a war creates good times, or when unnecessary bureaucracy or unfortunate legislation creates jobs in administration and also in companies and for lawyers, accountants, bankers, and the courts. The fault of free trade does not lie in the idea of free trade itself. It is obviously right. The fault lies in the fact that the real value growth that comes from free trade does not benefit work. The distribution of wealth of production is unfair. So the gains end up with the wrong people, those who have the power and the monopolies, and not with those who do the work and provide the means of production. To understand this, we can return to the example of Robinson Crusoe on Friday. We forgot a small detail. Friday is Robinson's slave. That is, the advantage that Robinson gets from free trade with foreign ships, he does not have to pass on to Friday, except as a mercy. He must still work for the wage that Robinson sets, and when Robinson has left the island to his descendants, they will of course, as the owners of the island, be able to demand whatever they want from those who came to the island without this ownership, as long as this system is tolerated. The abolition of tariffs will mean that one of the thieves who steal from work and wages will be chased away, but it does not help much if there are other thieves who steal the fruit of work. For example, large taxes on and duties on work and production, which are often even levied arbitrarily or misused by the state, unnecessary bureaucracy, payment of the state debt of previous generations, and so on. But even if this thief were removed, it would be of no use if there were one last robber left who stole the most of the rest, and that robber is the owners of the natural and society created land values, raw materials, and the holder of all other monopolies, except for certain patents which, issued in the right way, are reasonable. The value of things is an exchange value. Free trade is the exchange of goods, and the relative value that things have tends to fall, since innovations, cooperation, the development of society, division of labor, technology, and free trade itself reduce the amount of labor that is necessary. But the value of the natural and socially created land values and monopolies is an appropriation value which acts as an ultimate tariff on all labor and all means of production. A tariff that grows and grows since invention, cooperation, the development of society, division of labor, technology, and free trade itself improve wealth. Thus is for exactly the same reasons that cause the amount of labor necessary to fall. Just think, for instance, of the profit by owning property in our big cities, which make it nearly impossible for young people to afford a place just to live or stay. This last robber, the ultimate tariff robber, takes more and more, while work means less and less. So what is the cure? Yes, just as if democracy is not working well, the cure is more democracy, so we say. And when free trade is not working well, the cure is more free trade. Commercial free trade without tariffs between countries is at most only half free trade, and as such inadequate and with unfortunate side effects. True free trade will come when we have removed the last tariff robber, the last tariff that is placed on all work, the acquisition value that comes with ownership of land and other natural resources and all other private unjust monopolies. They must be made common property. This is the same as making ownership common without having to change the private right of use of land, raw materials, exclusive rights, etc. The users simply have to pay their bill. It is in fact a debt to the community for the benefit they have by getting this exclusive right to their part of the common property. And at last I'll come with some remarks on related to comments I often hear when I talk about free trade. Free trade is not absolute. Any country can of course subject free trade to restrictions, for example, for reasons of health, morality, harmful effects, etc. Every country can ban trade in drugs, impose certain requirements on food, electrical goods, cars, and so on. It must only apply that it is done without discrimination between domestic production and foreign production. In the event of a military attack at a country and other serious hostilities, it may of course be necessary to stop the trade with the enemy. Free trade should also include the free exchange of ideas, culture, writings, etc. Furthermore, it would be advantageous for any country to declare unilateral free trade also towards countries that impose tariffs on us rather than responding in the same way. Free trade is fundamentally the exchange of goods, but for practical reasons it is settled in currency. Devaluation or revaluation of currency can therefore act as tariffs, just as exploiting a strong position in the currency area, for instance dollar dominance. All this can disrupt free trade. A market determined exchange rate is a catalyst for genuine free trade. Free trade has also to include the right for people. Free trade has not to include the right for people to move freely across borders and to the right to foreign capital to be able to be used in one's own country. This is not necessary for free trade to work. Nor is uniform legislation, although the EU, for instance, probably believes that harmonization is absolutely necessary. A country which legislates that farms and holiday resorts, for instance, may not be owned by foreigners can have free trade, just as an absolute monarchy can have free trade with a democracy. This video argues, in the traditional way, that free trade increases overall prosperity, we could say. This may raise concerns because is material growth the same as happiness? And is not eternal growth the same as destruction of nature and our planet? Yes, it is in fact that way. Therefore, it is noted that one can just as well say about free trade that the provision of necessary goods can be done with less work. That is, that instead of getting more things, we can get more leisure time, more free time. And I hope you have enjoyed my video, and I will try to stop the camera here.